Welcome to the Highest Health Podcast. Raise your health, elevate yourself, and enrich your life. Experience a world of health sovereignty. As you near your highest health, you near your most luminous self. Hello, everyone. Today we have Dr. Julia Mirer joining us on the Highest Health Podcast. She is the Director of Strategy at Nushama, a Psychedelic Wellness Center, which offers medically supervised psychedelic treatments for sustained relief from depression, anxiety, chronic pain, addiction, and trauma-induced mood disorders in a serene and safe environment. Dr. Julia Mirer is one of the leading psilocybin experts and is advocating for a new paradigm of health and wellness, which acts as a merge between Eastern and Western medicine. She's also the Chief Education Officer at Mr. Psychedelic Law, an NPO that focuses on medical and spiritual research in an effort to drive responsible psychedelic reform. She also serves as a medical advisor and volunteer for several psychedelic-related projects. She holds a medical degree from Ross University School of Medicine. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julia.
Thank you for having me. I definitely wouldn't say I'm the leader in psilocybin research, although I am definitely very involved and excited about where this is going.
From my perspective, you are.
I appreciate that so much.
Of course. So why don't we get started by having you share a little bit about your transition into this field. I know you were on the traditional medical doctor route and found yourself floating over to more so transformative medicine.
Yeah, floating, I think, is a very nice word. It felt more like crashing. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a doctor since I was 7. I think the kind of childhood dream was to help people. The Western the Western context said that's a doctor. That's how you help people. And I went through medical school. I got into my residency. I was in New York, and it was, the first year, head down, you're working 80-hour weeks. You're just grateful to be there. And then the second year rolls around, you get like one weekend once in a while. And I started realizing that something's off, and I didn't know what was off. As people usually do, they're like, oh, there's something wrong with me. And so I took a leave of absence because I was like, you know what, I think I need to address some of my mental health. A little bit of burnout was starting, and I started therapy. I was in, I was like, I got this. I came back and I got it. Like I was, kind of interested again in what I was doing. And then again, I just kind of started becoming super aware of how toxic we are to each other within the healthcare system. How lacking preventative care is. We have all these amazing advances, and yet most of the diseases that people have are preventable diseases that are we're really just lacking that preventative care. Right. And so I became aware that we have half a toolbox missing, and the tools we have aren't working. And to the complete horror of my Russian Jewish doctor father, I resigned. I walked away from a future career in medicine with no real understanding of where I was going to go. I joked that I left medicine to pursue a life of healing, but it was really just, this interesting moment where I, as a healthcare worker, as a woman in general, we tend to always think about how our decisions affect others. And a lot of the inner dialogue was like, how am I going to disappoint my patients by leaving, my program by leaving, my parents by leaving? And then there was this voice that one day in my lowest moment said, how are you disappointing yourself by staying?
Wow.
And it was yeah. And it was this voice came from nowhere. It was in every freaking way, Julia, come on, wake up. I think that was the first time I heard my soul speak. So
Wow.
yeah, that was how I kind of shifted out of it. And then, for me, initially, I thought I was never going back into medicine. I discovered psychedelics very accidentally. And then I very intentionally started studying them. This was about 4 years ago. And that's how I eventually transitioned into a lot of the work that I'm doing now. But that first year, 6 months to a year, it was really that was my experience. It was just complete burnout. And then just suddenly something else came into my life.
Would you say that when you heard your soul speak, was that the spark that you were okay, it's time for me to move on from this? Prior to that, were you still in sort of contemplation about it?
So the interesting thing is so a little bit before that soul speak, what happened was, so I took my leave of absence. I started medication. My therapist said, I only think you'll need this for 2 years because residency is tough. Just got to close out and you'll be done. And then I went on vacation a few months later, and that's the first time that I tried psilocybin. And I came back to my residency, and I was suddenly more aware of certain things in my experience. So I already knew that we were assholes to each other. Now I'm picking up all the nuances of this assholery that's going on. I had these weird things with patients where it's I didn't have the medical words to explain why I want a certain test or a certain imaging done. But then 2-3 days later, we find out had we done that, we would have actually helped before it got worse. And I'm well, there's no way for me to explain this. And I think the reason why I heard my soul was because that initial psychedelic experience connected me to something deeper within me that I didn't have access to before. And once that happened, there was not a lot of thinking about anything. It was a gut feeling. It was a drive coming from somewhere I haven't felt a drive come from before.
Wow.
Where no amount of logic would have said yeah, definitely walk away from everything you've worked on for the last 30 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really it just unlocked some level of awareness that I became unable to ignore.
That's powerful. And my interpretation is that it really got you in touch with your intuition, and especially your ability to work with patients and feel a gut visceral feeling that they need a particular test. But at that moment, your peers around you might not agree. And even you didn't have the logic to explain why you felt this way. But then later on, time would confirm, had we done that, we would be in a better position.
Yep. It was nuts.
That sounds pretty nuts. But awesome and beautiful at the same time.
No.
Sure, you had so much fear that went through your mind.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there was never a moment in my entire life where I thought that I wouldn't become a doctor. I mean, I technically became a doctor, but I wouldn't become a practicing physician.
Right.
And it was actually after I resigned that I remembered something from my childhood. It was age 17 to 19. And this is why now when I work with patients, when I talk to friends, when I always ask, what did you want to be when you were younger? I think we figure out at a young age, and then somewhere along the way that that path gets taken over by whatever cultural, familial kind of influence exists. And a couple of weeks after I resigned, I remembered that I used to say, I feel like I'm meant to do something great that's going to cause a paradigm shift in some aspect of medicine. And it may not be as a doctor, but it's definitely via the med school route.
Wow.
And when I remembered that, it became a mantra that kept me going, even when, the fear would act up. Is there even is there a career option in this? How am I going to actually live in this reality? Cool, the spiritual realm and this, that, but
right.
We need to live here. We need to fix our lives here. And experience our lives. So for me, like every time it was kind of like the easy option, like just go back to residency, get your license, do the job. And everyone I would talk to would be like, you have nothing without a license, go back. And I'm like, I don't think that's true, because what I'm talking about and like this industry that I'm getting involved in, maybe having a license would prevent me from speaking as openly, would prevent me from doing certain things to bring in the interest of those that are licensed and practicing and like able to move the needle from within. But it was this mantra that I like remembered that helped guide me so that I wouldn't get distracted when the fear would like act up.
Wow, that is so powerful. I love how, when did you have this thought, when you were a child?
I remember talking about it from like age 17 to 19. And I think it was my dad that said, it was like, oh, that's just childhood idealism. Just do what you got to do.
That's crazy. Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, that's, I don't get to talk about that part as often.
It's so beautiful to hear how you essentially followed your intuition into this path and field that you're in now. And I'm sure changing so many lives. With that said, let's shift gears into how psilocybin speaks to what you've experienced, like helps people connect with this divine order of the universe. I believe that there's a divine order of the universe. And with me, with my personal psilocybin experiences, I feel like I'm far more connected to this divine order than I ever was, if I was even connected before. So I would love to hear your perspective and anything you would like to share in regards to this.
Yeah, I think, psilocybin, and I'll speak to psilocybin in particular, because that's really where a lot of my interest lies, even though we work with a lot of different things. When the divine order of things depends on the fact that each person is aligned with their purpose. And if you think about it, when in the human body, when all the cells they start as the same cell, and then they differentiate into like, okay, you're going to be a nerve cell, you're going to be a skin cell, you're going to be a heart cell. And I think with humans, we have similar things. It's like the kid that wants to be a janitor. You don't know if like, preventing them from living that dream is going to prevent them from having a multi-million-dollar company of like janitorial services around the country, because your feelings about what a janitor is prevents you from like letting your kid follow that. Right. So maybe there were points of differentiation for us, and we were supposed to go kind of along that path. But as I said earlier, parents, culture, friends, like you start choosing things a little bit more to remain in like the social dynamic, because that's how you remain safe. That was like historically, if you weren't part of a tribe, you died because you can't like survive on your own. So like there's all these like things that start to come with it. And we end up living a life that's not fully aligned with who our true self is. Most of us are not aware of this. And in mindfulness, there's this concept of like the true self and then the perceived self. The true self is who you are. The perceived self is who you present yourself to be to the world. And if you're like me, there's many perceived selves that could exist over your lifetime, depending on the situation that you're in. And the more we have to put up that front, the less authentic we are with ourselves, the further that distance grows. And that like that distance is represented in our reality, like in our lived experience, as symptoms. Addiction, anxiety, depression, like whatever that looks like, the more distance there is, the worse those symptoms get. So, if you, like, to me, that was the thing. I wanted to help people. I wanted to be, for lack of a better word, healer as a 7-year-old child.
Wow.
And so that kind of feeling inside doesn't match with what we do as doctors a lot of times, especially in our training, when we don't really have the ability to make the changes we want to make in the system and the process, whatever.
Right.
So a lot of healthcare workers end up with this really big distance between who they truly are and what they're forced to be.
Wow.
And there was one doctor, Z-Dog, he referred to it as moral injury. It's not burnout, it's moral injury. It's like doing the thing that you know is not aligned with your true self, and or your morals rather. So with psilocybin, I think it's it depends on how far deep you are in your symptoms, whatever they may be. So for some people, let's say microdosing, when they take a small amount of psilocybin, they may only have the capacity to just feel a little better. They may not have the capacity to connect so deeply to their true self yet.
Right.
And that's okay. With some of the higher dose experiences, and I have the amazing privilege of sitting with patients as they're getting their FDA clinical trial psilocybin for their major depression. It's like a 3.5 gram dose and a little, 3.5 to 5 grams, depending on the strain, they say. And this is like this big, profound experience that they have. And that can also like really help to connect you to yourself. I think a little bit more than the microdosing.
Okay.
But that experience, it may connect you to yourself and it may be very profound and may be really healing, but are you ready to receive that information? If you're not able to change your life circumstances, it may actually be difficult to know so much.
Right.
So, it's like it's an interesting little nuance. I think when people, the most important thing is for people to kind of know what they're coming into this experience for. If they want to really connect to their truest self, if they want to see what they're here to do, they have to also be willing to make those changes, because wisdom without action could just cause more anxiety.
Wow.
So I think it's like a little tangential of an answer. And you could ask me something so I could elaborate further, but really the ability to remove some of those like biased beliefs that is inherent in these psychedelic experiences can help you start to uncover who you are. But it doesn't happen necessarily overnight. It doesn't happen like the way that people are hyping it up. It's like cures everything. Like, no, it opens your eyes, but from there, it's kind of like up to you. What are you going to do with that information?
Right. No, I'm so glad that you went into all of that, because that's exactly what I was getting to, is this divine order where we're all designed, and we all are designed with a purpose. And I love your analogy to bring it back to a little bit of biology with the cell. It's like, oh, we all start as one cell, and then this cell is meant to be a heart cell or a lung cell. That's a really beautiful analogy. When you were speaking, I had a question pop up in regards to you saying how sometimes a therapeutic dose is not necessarily the best option for a patient, because there is this nuance where if you learn too much and you're not ready to make a change, then you are going to grow deeper into your depression or fall deeper into your depression or anxiety, etc. So with that said, I wonder if for certain individuals, it's better to do supervised microdosing at certain increments of time to sort of unravel this access to their truest self and their purpose.
Yeah. So what I noticed over time is, because I've had the privilege of speaking to such a wide range of individuals, from like, picking the brain of a homeless man to talking to some of the top scientists who've been in this work for 30 years. And there's like a lot of conversations about, is microdosing even effective? For me, it's like, anyone who's asking that, like, have you tried it? So, and then like the placebo effect, we also talk about that. It's just like, well, the placebo effect is actually our birthright. So let's have a very different conversation. But the way that I like to, like what I've noticed with talking to different people is that for people who love control is one thing, but even for people who are much more comfortable being in control, professionals tend to really be attached to their mind. So they're like, is this going to make me lose my mind? I can't afford that. Really like motivated people, they're like, I don't want to lose my motivation. So is it going to do that? People who don't like to have feelings, they're in control of their feelings. Like, is this going to make me more emotional? Yes, it can. So what ends up happening is for someone like with that level of, attachment to the control, a really high dose can actually be traumatizing. If they're not in a good therapeutic container, like if they're not in a safe space psychologically or physically, then being so out of control and not being able to do anything about it and having it last for so long can be very difficult, and it can turn people off of it. Those same people, if they start off with a microdose, they can, and I think supervised microdoses are really beneficial because we don't tend to talk out loud to ourselves. It's like considered weird. But
yes.
How many times have you like said something out loud and then you're like, this makes absolutely no sense. It was perfect in my head. I've now said it. It's ridiculous. Like, disregard what I just said.
Right.
So that's a lot of our inner dialogue. Like I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. Like if you actually say out loud the reasons why you believe that to be true, you a lot of times will be like, that's okay. Maybe I'll like take that back. And with the microdose, what happens is you become a little bit more honest with yourself. So if you're probed with a question, you may open your mouth to answer your usual stuff, and then something else comes out.
Oh, wow.
Asking you those questions, you're not gonna like really have that opportunity.
Right.
And I think that is a beautiful gift of that. So like for people, and I've seen this, a small dose, they get more comfortable with the medicine. People they're like, so like on an energetic level, like it's almost like this they develop a trust or like they trust the medicine, and it becomes less scary to even go on a higher dose. But the cool thing with the microdose is it can still start to little by little connect you to your gut instinct. And that's why, sometimes people be like, oh, you just got to go like high dose, man. Well, especially if someone has microdosed before, when they say no, I pay very close attention because there may be something in them that's saying, I'm not ready. I'm not ready for what's to come. I'm not ready for the information. I don't have the container to discuss what happens. And it like, one person that I spoke to is a man, and I'm thinking like, oh, it must be helping him so much. Like he's feeling better. And then a question arose. It was like, will microdosing more help me be less emotional? And in that moment, I realized like, wait a second, emotions for me, amazing. I feel them, I process them. But for an older man who has been culturally programmed with toxic masculinity, actually traumatizing for him to get emotional about things that are even like valid to be emotional about.
Wow.
And he shared with me, he's like, because I get sad about things and I just hate myself because, and I know it's toxic masculinity, but like, and to me, I was like, oh, wow. If this is a person that was forced to do more microdosing, they would not have a beneficial experience. It would actually throw them more into their story of like how shameful it is to have feelings. And like, if they're not next to somebody who can talk to them about it and like, let this be okay, then you're actually setting them up for like more discomfort.
Wow.
So that's one thing. The other thing I often talk about is, and I gave a lecture on this a few years ago because I kept meeting people who are like, oh, the microdosing isn't working for me. Or they'd say like, oh, I had a bad trip and like, I'm good. And so the way that I started to explain this to people is, the mushrooms are here to help you process your trauma. And when I would say that to people, they're like, oh, I didn't have a really traumatic like upbringing, like I'm good. And I go on to explain that there's one neurologist who defined trauma in its simplest definition as any negative experience that happens in a state of relative helplessness.
Wow.
And when you phrase it that way, you can see how we all experience little micro traumas or bigger traumas. But even those micro traumas, it's like, think about it. If you're in a relationship and you're staying together for the kids, you are relatively helpless.
Right.
If you're at a job that you hate, but you needed to pay rent, you are relatively helpless.
Yes.
And if you're a child, at any given point, you are relatively helpless. So any negative experience that happens as a kid could turn into something that changes your personality as an adult. And like the example I'll give is, you trip in front of your crush in kindergarten, you are then afraid to try out for basketball in high school and have fear of public speaking as an adult.
Wow.
And what happens with even with microdosing, but what I've noticed is, there's this trajectory of the trip. And initially, when you take it, you're like, there's could be visuals depending on the dose, feeling good. And then around hour 3 or 4, there starts to be, in our clinical study, that's when we start seeing people like with, silent tears. They're in their headphones and their mask, and or around with microdosing, around hour 3 or 4, somebody be like, oh, you want to go get a drink? Or like they'll smoke, or they'll go for food, sleep, sex, like whatever it is that they usually do to avoid their feelings. And the way I kind of paint the picture is, so when I was in med school, my dad would say, after you study all day, go to sleep at night so the little dudes in your brain can file everything away into the appropriate cabinets. And the way I experience, like the day to day, the way I think of it is, those same little dudes are taking inventory of every experience, and they're constantly in there filing everything away, like good, bad, neutral, and on like, and just, it goes on. When you experience something traumatic, what I imagine happens is you go into fight or flight mode. Those little dudes take like a screenshot of whatever just happened. They crumple it up. They throw it in the back of the brain. They're like, we'll get back to that later. We just need to survive. And we very rarely go back to remember that later. And there like just becomes this back room in the back of the mind of these like crumpled up pieces of paper. And the issue with that is that we no longer have access to that, like the memory of that trauma to a degree that makes it like useful. So if it was filed away, we could kind of remember things, but here it's in that back room. And little by little, those little traumas start to shape your personality. Each time you experience a trauma, it changes your view of yourself, your view of others, how you exist in the context of others, like all these like little things. So when you take a psychedelic, here, psilocybin, the first few hours, the little dudes are going through those front cabinets. They're like pulling out things that were like semi-stuffed in there. They're like, wait a second, this wasn't a bad experience. Like this actually taught you X, Y, and Z in all these different moments. So you refile it in a different place. And this is kind of the way I equate it to is, or the way that we can talk about it is you're rewriting your narrative. So, you pull out this thing and it was like such a traumatic experience at age 13, but now you get to be the adult telling your own self, like, that was okay.
That's so
somebody
cool.
else tells you that, you're like, no, you don't know anything. My life is over. But now you get to be that adult telling your younger self almost like that was okay. And here's why. And that's very cool. And so even that in and of itself could be really healing for people. Like they feel lighter. Now around hour 3, those little dudes are very like proud of like their cleanup. And then they look back and they're like, oh shit, what's back there? And, they start pulling out those crumpled up pieces of paper. And amazing if you're in a therapeutic context, amazing if you're like, with a good friend that you can talk to openly, and amazing if you are with a bunch of people at a festival and then like all of a sudden you're remembering this like traumatic childhood experience. Probably not the best moment. And that's sometimes when people have that bad trip because they start fighting that information. And what happens, you fight that. They're like, okay, it's like semi-crumpled up piece of paper. They just like put it in a manila folder at the top of the cabinet. They go in for another one. Like, and so if you really don't let that stuff process, you can really compromise your experience and it becomes a negative one. But this is also why people say, the bad trips are actually some of the most healing. It's because you move past that and then you really get to process it. And when you process it, you're uncrumpling these pieces of paper and you're remembering your trauma. Now, we tend to remember how things made us feel and not necessarily what actually happened. So in this process, it's such a gift because you are remembering details of the traumas that you have forgotten for years.
Wow.
And the beauty there is that we learn so much more from our traumas than we do from our joys.
Wow.
But when it's a crumpled up piece of paper, we have no access to that information. So here you're accessing all the things you learned and then you get to file it away accordingly. Maybe it was still a bad experience, but at least the emotional charge is removed. So it becomes part of your story rather than a defining characteristic of your personality.
That's so powerful.
And
Wow.
like, so that's kind of, when I tell people, it's like, what are you ready for? And then the dose matters, because you could take a slightly higher, like a medium dose, like maybe 0.5 gram, and you have the good feelings that come along with whatever insights you may be getting. And you realize, oh my God, I love the beautiful soul that sits inside of my significant other. But maybe if you take a slightly lower dose where you get like more of the insight and less of like the positive, like feel good feelings, you realize like, oh man, I'm like in a toxic codependent relationship. So
Wow.
yeah, there's like different levels that you can kind of play around with once you learn to trust that this is like, a safer thing, and it's a process, and it's like, they're here to help you work through whatever you're ready to work through.
That's incredible. There are so many amazing things that you brought up, and it sparked some other questions and comments. So the first is, so you speak to this trauma that happens throughout our lives. It could be something that you don't even consider to be trauma, but in a vulnerable position, it is trauma. So essentially what you're speaking to is, and how those traumas bring us, change our personality. So you're speaking to like a regression that happens to us. And the way I'm interpreting it is, when we experience these traumas and we don't address them, is we're disconnecting from our truest self. And the way you say it is changes our personality, but I think it also puts us on a different trajectory throughout life, because whether that trauma causes us to believe that we're not good enough, or usually something along those lines, I think it removes us from our purpose in life.
Yeah, I actually just got goosebumps as you were saying that. Yeah, I mean, if you have less kind of, the more you doubt yourself, the less likely you are to take certain risks. If you grew up and there wasn't a lot of support in your family, you're not going to feel like you're able to take those leaps of faith either. And so there's like so much that happens for us as children. And in terms of the trajectory changing, I mean, you can see how like one little thing can just compile over time.
Right.
And
there's a compound effect to it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what, there's an interesting thing that happened. Currently MDMA is being studied for PTSD, and that's Molly ecstasy for anyone listening. And so they're bringing this to market as a medicine to be used for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the interesting things that happen is they'll go in, and for the veterans in particular, they go in to process this trauma of being in war. And one of the interesting phenomenons is that these veterans will realize that, they come back and they're so, like, it's difficult for them to reconcile the fact that they actually were, how do I phrase this? They were willing to do the crazy things that they had to do. Like, they were willing to kill, they were willing to do all of this. When they come back here, it's like, wait, how is that even possible? And when they start peeling it back, it's like, oh, there was childhood anger that was able to be let out in the field.
Right.
And so like, that's what was like, so when you start to like peel back the complexity of like people's experience, it can go like, you can go really deep with that.
Right.
And I think I'm blanking on the part of the question. Sorry.
It was, I was just saying how this regression happens that completely changes our trajectory. And the way I see it is, it brings us further away from being able to take this path towards our purpose.
Right.
Yeah. So no, but that's a fine example with Men at War. Yeah. Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to ask you is so I've seen this with friends, and they've had bad trips, but it presents as physical, like it presents as being unable to breathe or like a choking sensation. So was wondering if you have any insight into that.
So I've watched some interesting I've watched people share their experience as a dose was kicking in, and they actually walked me through where they feel all of the energy. And it was like chakra by chakra by chakra. So there's an amazing book called Eastern Body, Western Mind, where it kind of puts together the developmental stages of the chakras in the context of the developmental stages of an adult, like of a human.
Wow.
From, like in the womb until, the first round of chakras are done, like early 20s. And also the psychological kind of components and what like different like pathologies look like based on the chakra that's affected.
Wow.
And so the first thing that I thought when you said that, it's like they're feeling it in the chest, they can't breathe. That's a heart chakra. There's something that might be coming up that requires that. The throat, the choking, that's the fifth chakra of communication. So there may be things that are like, that's where the blockages may be.
Wow.
And the book's actually cool because you could go back and be like, oh, here's the different things. Oh yeah, I'm actually going through this too.
Right.
So I think part of that is that. And then also there's, there's an amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score, where it talks about how much of trauma is actually kept in our bodies. And the way that I think of it, and I talk to people about it, is like, the Western model, you have a symptom and we're like, oh, we got to get rid of that symptom. And so you end up taking a medication that stops your depression and you haven't addressed the cause. Your soul is like, dude, come on, like we gotta work on this.
Because
so
remember that symptom is a sign of trauma from the past. So just to tie it together.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, there's something here that's triggering you. Something is coming up. And we, in the Eastern practices, they're like, lean into that. In the Western model, it's like, we got to get rid of that. And like, you get rid of the depression, all of a sudden you get anxiety. Get rid of the anxiety, all of a sudden you have, OCD. Like all of these things start to compile because your soul is like asking. And when you don't pay attention to any of the mental health kind of warning signs, the inner dialogue, it starts to go into your body. Knee pain, all of a sudden you have back pain, migraine, like your body's now trying to tell you something.
Right.
So there's like one of the biggest mistakes in medicine is separating mind, body, and soul.
Right.
So whenever there's physical manifestations, now I think of it as like, okay, what is this associated with? Like grief is stored. I think it was grief in the lungs.
Wow.
Like in the chest. So that may be something that's coming up, for me working in pediatrics, where we had like 27% of the patient population with asthma.
Wow.
Now I'm like, what are you going through?
Right.
So like, because we are so complex that trying to understand ourselves based on one modality is just so limiting. And I think the reason why we have so many people waking up and like really starting to address their state of being in different ways is because we have the internet. We have access to these other practices that before, like, unless a guru came to your city, like that wasn't something that you were aware of. So it's like really amazing. So for people, whenever they're feeling the physical symptoms, I encourage them, like, go online and see, like, what is the meaning of that? Like, what is the spiritual significance of, throat issues? You have the vagus nerve that goes all over the place. Like,
yep.
In medicine, I was like, that's cool, does so many things. And now I'm like, oh, everything is vagus nerve. Like calming your nervous system is like everything that we don't talk about.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the information is out there. So whatever people feel physically, go search it, be curious, and like try not to go too much down a rabbit hole, and make sure, like the sources aren't just like, some like, I don't know, basement witch,
right,
apothecary. But maybe some of them have something to like add as well.
Absolutely. It's a point of self-discovery.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Excellent. So there's so many different things that I could dive into with you, but I think what would be most beneficial for the listeners is for you to take us through what happens at Nushama during one of these like therapeutic sessions, because I don't think there are many people even know a facility like this exists. And this is in Manhattan, right?
Right. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And so at Nushama, we're working with ketamine. Ketamine has been around, like it was synthesized in the 60s. It was been used as an anesthetic. It's been used for acute pain, like for sharp pain, for chronic pain. And in the last 3 years, it's become what the FDA calls, it was given a breakthrough therapy designation, meaning that it is currently being used off-label, meaning like insurance doesn't cover it. It's not like a particular condition that is, the standard of care for this particular condition. But it means like, hey, there's this drug that's been used for other things that may have value for this. So let's start looking at that, and let's start allowing doctors to use this so that we can start collecting more information. And so we use ketamine in the clinic.
Okay.
It is delivered via IV, intravenous, and you are essentially, it's a much shorter trip. So mushrooms can be like around 6 hours. LSD can be like 12 hours.
Okay.
This is much shorter. The IV means that when you start the drip, the medicine is in there, it starts working. And then when you turn it off, the medicine is out, and then you're kind of recovering. So it's about 90 minutes to 2 hours that you can do this over. And we fully believe that the ketamine is just a small component of the therapeutic value. Because, the experience is only as valuable as what you do with it.
Right, right.
And so what we realize is really important is not only like the integration, which comes afterward. That's like, after you've done it, what are the insights? How are you going to apply it? Right. But what's really important is the preparation. Are you going into this informed of what's going to happen? Like, are you ready for some of the things that come up? What are the, what's in place to help you process if things are difficult?
So you take the client through this?
Right. So we are building out with an app. So we're collaborating with a group. They have an app, and the whole point is to be able to give the member, we call them members at Nushama because patient implies you're sick. And we're trying to build community. So we kind of bring you in as a member of our community. And we want to make sure that you have as much information as possible. Like ketamine is a very powerful medicine. The doses we give are psychedelic. There's you actually, and maybe some people have heard ketamine has been used in the street. It's, the K-hole is actually a really healing place, turns out. So for us, it's like, so we do invest in preparing the participants, preparing the members for what's to come. We also look for any kind of red flags. Some people hear the hype around psychedelic therapy, like this is for me. It's like, well, no, it's not. Maybe not yet. Maybe we can get you there, but here's some of the reasons why it may not be good for you. Some of the things like psychosis, schizophrenia in the family. These require, I think, a lot more attention, and in the future will be addressed. But right now we're working with what we are able to do safely. So, they get that preparation. They do a medical intake with our physician. He's incredible. He studied the Kabbalah. Like, he's very spiritual, like not the typical Western medicine doctor at all. We also have a psychiatric nurse practitioner so that, if they need further care, that's going to be available. And we keep working on pricing to make sure that, we got to make this more affordable. So then before their session, we like to give them some time between their initial intake and the sessions so that they could ask us more questions if need be, but also mentally start to prepare themselves. We give them advice, stay away from certain media, give yourself that space, like, make sure that your schedule allows you to have some time afterwards as well. This is, we're in New York, everyone's busy. It's like, give yourself some space.
Right.
And then before their session, we have integration, like people whose sole role is to talk. talk about, the preparation part, get you prepared with some breathing exercises, get you kind of in your body so that you can go leave your body. And then they come back in and help ground you again afterwards, get some key takeaways. And the purpose of that is, this can be a really, really intense experience. And we want to be able to have people take something from it. Like, it could be so crazy. It's like, I don't even know what to make of it. Well,
Wow.
Pick one thing.
Right.
Pick one thing that you can take with you and integrate into your day-to-day. And then we'll kind of take it from there. There's a lot of value in also following up either with their own healthcare professional, whoever their mental health care professional, within a 48-hour window. There's this golden window of increased neuroplasticity, which means your brain is more receptive to new information.
Excellent.
And then for a lot of people, 7 to 10 days is really the duration of the most profound effect of the drug. And from that point on, sometimes people will come in for their repeated sessions. Some people, that's enough, and they kind of try to see how long they could take that. And for us, we oftentimes talk about, healing, and we got to be healing and all that. And that seems very elusive. So one of the things that I joke about, I'm like, stop healing, start living.
Yeah. This is a great point.
Because otherwise you're going to keep okay, I don't think I'm healed enough. Well, you're healed enough to go outside.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That's the big thing that we don't talk about in medicine. Somebody comes into their doctor, like, I want to feel better. It's like, here's a medication. Well, okay, you want to feel better. Here's ketamine. What does better look like? What are you going to do with being better?
Right.
Because if you don't have an answer for that, then you're looking at 7 to 10 days of an effect, and then you're kind of back to where you started. So what we do is encourage people to find out, what are those things you used to do that brought you joy before you were so anxious, before you were so depressed, before your addiction, whatever it is. And it's like, go do them. You have 7 to 10 days of relief from the burden of your symptoms. Go do the things that bring you the most joy, the things you've forgotten bring you joy. Go see the loved ones. Go outside in nature. Give yourself time. Give yourself some space to do whatever it was, because that's the real healing. It's like becoming more receptive to those things around you that are so beautiful. Absolutely. Seeing those things around you that are improving your state of being that you were blind to because you were so in your story, so in your perseverating thoughts. So that's for us, one of our metrics of success is how much a member doesn't need us anymore.
That's incredible.
Because that's the goal. There's so many people that need help. If we can help you enough that you don't need us, tell your friends, we'll help them too. And then hopefully they don't need us. And then everyone is just available, is there and able to attend our community events, the places where you get to bond with people, so that you actually, so many of us have this abandonment in our, especially after COVID.
Right.
We have so much loneliness that just the act of joining with other people for an experience can be healing. So it's
absolutely.
How do we get people more ready to do that?
That's fantastic. So many fantastic points you made, but one that is sparking right now is this fact of getting out of the mindset of healing and connecting with living. Because what I see a lot in my studies with people who are going through health issues is they attach to these health limitations. And I think what happens during that is you forget who you were, because now all that's going through your head is this idea of being ill, and whether it's psychological or physiological. So I think really taking an opportunity to use that neuroplasticity that is generated during these sessions and post sessions to help them connect with who they are and what they love to do in life, and start disconnecting with whatever they're dealing with psychologically or physically. And then that will have a ripple effect into the limbic system, essentially, because it's your limbic system is, in easy terms, is your thoughts, and your thoughts control these physical responses throughout your body. But it allows you to rewrite your story with your limbic system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's what our medical director, when he worked with patients, he was like, the ketamine removes everything that isn't you, so that you remember what the you feels like.
That's so cool.
And then the goal is like, okay, we'll figure out how to like do that here, because you don't want to be stuck in the ketaverse. Like, you don't want to like keep going out there and like thinking that the healing comes from being in that state of like nothingness. It's like, no, that's your reprieve. Like, that's your ability to feel that again, so that you can come back recharged and like wanting to know, like, how do I get that in this reality? Like, how do I experience that with the tools that I have here?
So true. I've experienced that with myself, is like, and I've had that same thought cross my mind, is like, how do, because it's like, you can't live in that space.
Nope. You can try. I mean, listen, you can definitely, the whole spiritual bypassing where it's like, you're just like microdosing and you're like, everything is great. Like, no, it's not. You're like, you need to pay rent.
Right.
So it's like not about getting stuck there. It's remembering that that's a feeling that you can have, and then exploring ways to find it again.
Yes, that's an excellent point. There was something else I wanted to mention, but it just slipped my mind. Would you say everything that you described with the ketamine process that you take your members through at Nushama, I would imagine there's an overlap between a ketamine experience and psilocybin experience, particularly speaking to the neuroplasticity that happens in the brain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the psilocybin and the classic psychedelics, they work on the serotonin receptor, the serotonin system. And ketamine is kind of called a dirty drug because it hits so many different receptors in like varying amounts, but less so the serotonin and more with the NMDA and dopamine. And however, I think what we're going to realize with time is that, like what I was saying before, like the experience, like 20% is the drug, 80% is the preparation and the integration. So regardless of what the medicine is going to be, like the way I look at ketamine, this woman, Pam Kriskow, doctor, she said it beautifully. She said, ketamine is psychedelic scaffolding, meaning if we can create systems, if we can put systems in place that really focus on that preparation and the integration, then it's not going to matter as much what the medicine is, because the paradigm shift is in bringing back the therapy, the group, the community. Like, I see. Psychedelics are almost like a Trojan horse to like the things that actually are beneficial. Is just we've grown so biased and so disheartened by a bunch of bad therapy sessions or like yoga that didn't work. Like all of these things, we just have, again, these biased beliefs from these traumas of things not working.
So true.
And it's just removing that so that we can do the things that actually make a difference. Like if you do a bunch of psychedelics, but you're not exercising, you're not eating right, you're not sleeping well, you're not bonding with people, it's only going to take you so far. And it may take you into a much lonelier, like kind of isolated place.
This is true. And it really paints the picture and connects you with what is most important or has the potential to. And with that said, a reoccurring theme that I notice between myself and my friends is like, it connects you with your mortality. And if there's anything you can speak to on that, I would love for you to share.
Yeah. So I actually had one experience where I was like, what's going on with this like end of life distress study? What is the dose they're using? Okay, let me try this out. Let's see what happens. And it was one moment where, like, whether my eyes were open or closed, I'm seeing the same visuals. I was like, it's time for me to like lay down. I lay down and I have this kind of moment of, I've definitely taken too much, because I've diagnosed this breathing pattern in dying patients before. My hands and feet are cold. My neighbor has my keys, so my dog will be taken care of. All right, I guess I'm done. And in that moment of letting go, it was the most blissful, beautiful, like feeling, just that like to this day, I remember this like years ago. And I had three consecutive thoughts that came to mind after that. The first one was, oh, I could see why they're using this for the study. This is like exactly what you would need. The second thought was, I wonder if this is how people die in their sleep, because they have this like, hurting body, and then they go into this dream state where they see this and they're like, why would I come back from there? Like, this is so amazing. And they just go to this beautiful place. And then my third thought was, if we show people this without the proper support, like they see what this is like, what's going to stop them from killing themselves when their like suicidal thoughts come back, once they've seen what's on the other side? And that informs everything that I do from that. Like that has informed everything I do from that point forward, because, for some people, the only thing preventing them from killing themselves is the fear of what's on the other side.
Wow.
And if you know what's on the other side, and then you have this like, inner knowing of like, things are going to be okay, then you might rob yourself of all the other lessons you have to learn in this life by taking your own life in that moment. And maybe that's also a lesson that, in all like the experiences we have, maybe that's one of the things, taking your own life or something.
Right.
But, you can convince yourself of that thing that I just said and be like, well, this is like my lesson for this life. Like, and it's just, if the people experience this without that place to talk about it afterwards, like that like okayness with mortality may take a turn that we didn't expect. And so I think like that's a very important conversation. But that being said, ketamine is particularly effective at removing suicidal ideation.
Wow.
Where within 45 minutes, you can be suicidal to no longer suicidal.
Wow.
And that's why I think the future of ketamine, a lot of its use will be in the like emergency room setting or EMS, where it's like, we need to crisis control right now. You snap out of it. And it's like, you have 7 to 10 days to figure out, how did you get here? Was it your couples problems? Like, here's MDMA couples counselor. Was it your addiction? Here's an Ibogaine treatment center. Childhood trauma, here's your therapist and your microdosing regimen. But like, I think that connecting to your mortality can look different ways for different people at different times. And having like a really in-depth conversation about it is important, especially for those people that are prone to it.
Wow, that's really powerful. Talk about the ability for psilocybin to have profound effects on depression, like a year past a trip.
So I think it really depends on how much a person is coming. Like what I've seen in the clinical trial is, if someone is coming in with a lot of years of, trying to figure themselves out, all these self-help books, it's almost like a toolbox of like messy tools that they're just like, I don't know what to do with this. They come out on the other side knowing exactly where every tool is, what tool is used for what, and able to run with that. And we had a patient in particular where this was a woman who could not get the words out without crying. And a year later, she called to ask about somebody else joining the study. And I could hear her smiling through the things that she was saying. And to me, that was like such a profound thing. And they did this study where like decades after the participants took a high dose of psychedelics, they followed up with them and they said that there was still one of the top 5 most impactful moments of their life, up there with the birth of a child or the death of a loved one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
incredible.
It's like certain things you can't unsee. There's certain things that you're just like, it makes it easier to remember to let things go. It makes it a little bit easier to reconcile certain things that are happening, because you kind of have seen a bird's eye view, and it changes things.
Totally
Although there's also the flip side of like, there's the really transformational things, and then there's the parts where it can actually inflate someone's ego if they're just going in. Sometimes you hear it's like, oh, I'm just curious, I just want to see what happens. And then you have this ego death, and then the ego comes back like, I even survived that.
Wow.
So it's to say that like psychedelics are going to change the world just because anyone who takes it is going to be just this better person, it's an overstatement. But it definitely gives a person a choice of who they're going to be.
It's an option for growth and healing. We'll end it on that note. Where can listeners find you, Julia?
So I'm on Instagram, reflective_Mirer, spelled like my last name, Mirer. I'm on LinkedIn, and if anybody has any questions, I'm always happy to answer them or direct them in to the right person who can. I think the best thing that people can do is start this conversation. If you know things about psychedelics, talk to people who don't, because that's how you're going to spread this information. And the more people we can get on board kind of saying the same things, I think the quicker we'll be able to make changes, whether in healthcare policy or just, our communities.
Excellent. Creating awareness and giving options. I love it. Oh, the point
what you're doing, is really important for that. So thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it. The point that I wanted to make before was with these types of healing opportunities, it takes preparation, intent, and then reflection afterwards to really garnish the most out of it.
Exactly.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, Julia, I'll catch you on the other side.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Highest Health. If you gained value from today's episode, leave a review, share with a friend, or post on social media. If you're interested in achieving your highest health or already pursuing it, send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you.